My name is Reid Sterling. I'm 31 years old, and today I have to make a choice that will change my life forever. Those were the last words I heard from the man I loved before he turned his back on me. I stood frozen in the chilling air of the historic wooden chapel in Aspen, watching Reid Sterling, the heir to a prestigious hotel empire, tuck a $1 million check into his tuxedo pocket. The mountain snow whistled through the luxurious hall, but nothing was colder than the look in Reid's eyes at that moment. His mother stepped up in the middle of the ceremony not to offer a blessing, but to deliver a ruthless ultimatum in front of 300 high society guests. She placed that check in her son's hand and forced him to choose either this money to secure his future or a marriage to someone not on their level, like me. Reid looked at me, a gaze so hauntingly empty, then he gripped the check tightly and walked out the door without a single word of explanation. I stood there alone in a $5,000 wedding dress, while that woman smiled triumphantly as if she had just swept a stain off her family's reputation. But neither of them knew that this $1 million check was the final nail in the coffin for the Sterling empire they worked so hard to build. Have you ever seen someone sell out their love right at the altar for a mere number? If you want to see how I made the Sterling family pay a heavy price for this public betrayal, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the shocking twists ahead. Don't forget to leave a comment letting me know what you would do if you were in my shoes. Now let's go back 10 months ago to where all the lies began. 10 months before the disaster in Aspen, my life felt like a scene from a romantic movie that I wasn't supposed to star in. We were in our modest apartment in Denver, a space filled with mismatched furniture and the scent of takeout Thai food, which was a world away from the gilded cages Reid grew up in. That evening, as the rain blurred the city lights outside our window, Reid knelt down on the hardwood floor. He didn't have a diamond the size of a marble, just a simple gold band, and a look of genuine vulnerability that I had never seen before. When he asked me to be his wife, I saw a future where love outweighed lineage, and for a brief moment I believed we could actually make it. However, the fairy tale lasted exactly 72 hours. It ended the moment a sleek black limousine pulled up to our curb, and Eleanor Sterling stepped out, bringing the cold air of high society into our small living room. She hadn't been invited, but a woman like her never waited for an invitation. She had seen our engagement announcement on social media, and to her, it was a declaration of war. Eleanor didn't bother with pleasantries as she scanned our apartment with an expression of profound disgust, her eyes lingering on my bargain store rug as if it were contaminated. "Reid, darling, you've had your fun playing house, but this joke has gone far enough." She said, her voice like silk wrapped around a razor blade. She didn't look at me when she spoke, treating me as if I were part of the furniture. When Reid tried to defend our decision, Eleanor finally turned her piercing gaze toward me. She told me directly that a Sterling does not marry a middle-class nobody, and that my presence in his life was a stain on a legacy that had taken generations to build. She spoke of status and breeding as if we were living in the 19th century, but beneath her arrogance I noticed something else, a flicker of desperation. She was obsessively focused on how this union would look to their investors and the press far more than a mother should be. She didn't ask us to change our minds. She commanded it. When she realized Reid wouldn't budge, she shifted her tactics with terrifying precision. She declared that if this wedding were to happen, it would be on her turf under her rules. She demanded the ceremony take place at the Sterling family resort in Aspen, claiming it was for the sake of tradition. But I knew better. She wanted me in an environment where she held all the cards, where the staff answered to her, and where the isolation of the mountains would keep my influence over Reid to a minimum. She talked incessantly about the Sterling image, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her designer scarf. It was the first time I suspected that the prestigious Sterling name might be a hollow shell, and she was the architect trying to keep it from collapsing. Eleanor left after 30 minutes, leaving behind the suffocating scent of expensive perfume and a silent warning that my life would never be peaceful again. 6 months before the wedding, the pressure shifted from social snobbery to legal warfare. Eleanor Sterling summoned me to her private office, a cold, glass-walled fortress overlooking the Denver skyline, to present me with what she called standard family protocol. It was a prenuptial agreement so restrictive it bordered on a surrender document. Alongside it was a non-disclosure agreement (NDA) with penalty clauses that could bankrupt a small country. Eleanor leaned back in her leather chair, her fingers steepled, watching me with a predatory stillness as she explained that my signature was the only way I would ever be allowed to carry the Sterling name. She spoke of protecting the family's sacred assets and ensuring that Reid's future remained uncompromised by outside influences. To her, I was a liability to be neutralized with ink and paper. However, Eleanor had made a fatal error in her assessment of me. She saw a girl desperate for her son's approval, but she forgot that my day job involved dissecting financial structures and identifying systemic failures. As a risk analyst, I didn't just read words, I audited the reality behind them. Attached to the prenup were several mandatory financial disclosure statements for the Sterling Group. As I began to scan the balance sheets, my professional instincts screamed at me. The numbers were too clean, the growth projections were unnaturally stable, and the debt-to-equity ratios felt manipulated. I spent hours that night cross-referencing these private disclosures with the Sterling Group's public tax filings from the previous fiscal year. The discrepancy was staggering. The private documents revealed a labyrinth of shell companies and high-interest bridge loans that were nowhere to be found in their public reports. The Sterling Empire wasn't just struggling, it was hollowed out, a house of cards leaning against a gentle breeze. They were hiding nearly $200 million in toxic debt. Eleanor's obsession with the family image wasn't just vanity, it was a desperate cover for an imminent financial collapse. She needed Reid to marry into a situation where no one would ask questions, and she thought my NDA would bury any chance of the truth leaking out. Instead of panic, I felt a cold, calculating clarity. I didn't tell Reid. His blind loyalty to his mother made him a liability at this stage. Instead, I made 2 encrypted phone calls. The first was to my brother Silas Vance, a senior partner at a major hedge fund known for aggressive corporate takeovers. The second was to my oldest friend, Marcus Thorne, a brilliant attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions. I sent them the digital copies of the discrepancies I had found, knowing they would understand the implications immediately. We weren't just going to survive this wedding, we were going to prepare a trap of our own. While Eleanor was busy measuring the length of the aisle, Silas and Marcus began the quiet process of buying up the Sterling's distressed debt through third-party intermediaries. I signed the prenup the very next morning with a genuine smile on my face, for I knew I had finally found the Achilles heel of this powerful woman. 3 months before the wedding, the shadow of Eleanor Sterling finally reached into my professional life. It started on a Tuesday morning at the bank, a day that should have been routine until I was called into the compliance director's office. Eleanor had realized I was digging too deep into the family's decaying financial foundations, and she didn't just want to stop me, she wanted to destroy me. I was presented with a folder of fabricated evidence alleging that I had engaged in insider trading by sharing confidential client data with external parties. The irony was palpable. The woman hiding $200 million in toxic debt was accusing me of a breach of ethics. I was immediately placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Eleanor's plan was calculated to be a death blow to my career, a move she believed would leave me bankrupt and utterly dependent on her son's mercy. She called me that afternoon, her voice dripping with a feigned condescending sympathy. She suggested that perhaps the stress of joining the Sterling family was too much for my unstable background, and that I should focus on being a quiet, compliant bride rather than a career woman. She expected me to crumble to beg for her to use her influence to make the charges disappear. She wanted me stripped of my professional identity so she could remake me into a silent accessory for the Sterling brand. However, she failed to realize that by removing me from the office, she had unintentionally handed me the greatest gift of all time. Instead of spending my days auditing spreadsheets for the bank, I moved my operations to my brother's private office. Silas Vance and I turned the next 12 weeks into a masterclass in financial retaliation. While the legal team at the bank was chasing shadows, Silas and I were finalizing our short-selling strategy against Sterling Group's public holdings. Every day we moved with surgical precision, quietly accumulating the family's high-interest debt through a network of shell companies that Silas managed through his hedge fund. We didn't just want to protect my future, we were systematically dismantling theirs. I worked 10 hours a day analyzing the market trends and identifying exactly when to trigger the sell-offs that would send their stock into a tailspin. Reid was kept completely in the dark, his mind preoccupied with the superficial details of the Aspen ceremony that his mother continued to obsess over. Whenever he visited, I played the part of the distraught unemployed fiancé, letting him believe I was broken by the accusations. It was a role I played perfectly because it kept Eleanor complacent, convinced that she had finally won. She thought she had locked me in a cage, but she had no idea she had just given me all the time I needed to tear her empire to pieces. 2 weeks before the wedding, the air in Aspen turned brutally cold, reflecting the atmosphere inside the grand ballroom of the Sterling Resort. This was the rehearsal dinner, an event Eleanor had curated to showcase the family's supposed invincibility to their high-profile business partners and investors. I sat at the head table draped in silk, but feeling like a condemned prisoner being paraded before a crowd. Eleanor took the stage, her diamond necklace catch the light as she began a toast that quickly devolved into a public assassination of my character. She didn't just introduce me, she labeled me. She spoke of how Reid had a charitable heart for bringing a jobless, struggling girl into their inner circle, effectively announcing my professional downfall to the very people who once respected me. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Eleanor turned her sharp gaze toward me, her smile never reaching her cold, predatory eyes. "I can end your future with a single phone call, Cassidy." She whispered loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear her tone dripping with the arrogance of a woman who believed she held every card in the deck. Throughout this entire ordeal, Reid sat directly beside me, his shoulders hunched and his head bowed. He refused to meet my eyes, staring intensely at his untouched plate, as if he could disappear into the porcelain. When I reached for his hand under the table, he pulled away, his fingers trembling. It was a cowardice that stung far more than Eleanor's insults. Later that evening, in a secluded corner of the terrace, Reid finally broke his silence, though it offered no comfort. He admitted that his mother had officially frozen his trust funds and threatened to strip him of his inheritance if he dared to defend me or question her authority. "She has everything, Cassidy. Without her, I have nothing," he confessed, his voice cracking with a pathetic desperation. I realized then that I wasn't marrying a man. I was marrying a shadow controlled by a puppeteer. The love I once felt was being replaced by a cold, analytical resolve. He had chosen his comfort over my dignity, and in doing so, he had simplified the task ahead of me. However, I wasn't finished with Eleanor. As she approached us later to deliver another condescending remark about the wedding flowers, I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "It's a beautiful resort, Eleanor. It's a shame that a $200 million toxic debt bubble is about to burst right over it." I said, my voice as calm as the winter night. The color drained from her face instantly, her glass of champagne shaking in her hand as the mask of the powerful matriarch slipped for a fraction of a second. She tried to maintain her smirk, calling me a delusional liar, but the flicker of pure terror in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She was a captain trying to hide the fact that her ship was already underwater. That night, amidst the sub-zero temperatures of the Colorado mountains, I understood that the man beside me had truly died in my mind. The morning of the wedding arrived with a heavy silence that even the luxury of the Sterling resort could not mask. Outside, the Aspen mountain peaks were swallowed by a relentless blizzard, casting a gray, ominous light into the historic wooden chapel. I stood at the entrance, adjusted my veil, and felt a strange, icy calm. This was the stage Eleanor had built to finalize her dominance, but she had no idea the audience was about to witness her downfall instead. As the music began and I walked down the aisle, I didn't look at the 300 influential guests or the flashing cameras of the society reporters. I looked straight at Reid, who stood by the altar with a face so pale he looked like a ghost in a tuxedo. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision until the minister reached the moment of the vows. Before Reid could utter a single word, Eleanor Sterling stood up from the front row. The room went dead silent as she walked toward the altar with the slow, deliberate grace of a queen about to execute a traitor. She didn't say a word to me. Instead, she pulled a slip of paper from her clutch and held it out to her son. $1 million, Reid, she said, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. This is your last chance to choose your future or this mistake. The guests gasped, and the reporters scrambled to capture the most scandalous moment in Aspen's history. I watched Reid's eyes drop to the check. I could see the internal struggle lasting only seconds before the cowardice I had witnessed 2 weeks ago took full control. He knew the Sterling empire was crumbling, and that $1 million was likely the only liquid asset his mother had left to offer him. Without looking at me, without a single tear or apology, Reid reached out and took the check. He folded it carefully, tucked it into his breast pocket, and walked down the aisle, pushing past the shocked guests and disappearing into the white void of the blizzard outside. Eleanor stood there, her chin tilted up in a mask of supreme victory, expecting me to collapse in shame. Instead, I did something that froze the breath in her lungs. I smiled. I stepped toward the microphone at the altar, ensuring every guest and every live streaming camera could hear me clearly. Thank you, Eleanor, for turning this betrayal into such a magnificent public event, I said, my voice steady and ringing with authority. You thought you were buying my silence and my dignity, but all you've done is ensure that the entire world will now witness the spectacular collapse of your family. I looked directly into the lenses of the reporters, the hint of the financial storm I had prepared for her glinting in my eyes. She tried to maintain her smirk, but the public nature of my defiance began to crack her composure. Snow continued to fall, but I felt a burning surge of power as I walked out of that chapel, leaving behind a sea of shocked whispers and a woman who had just realized she played right into my hands. 24 hours later, the grandeur of the Sterling Group headquarters in Denver felt more like a mausoleum than a corporate powerhouse. Inside the executive boardroom, Eleanor Sterling was frantically shouting into her desk phone, her composure shattered as she attempted to use that $1 million check to stall the banks from freezing her remaining assets. Reid sat across from her, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, clutching the piece of paper that he believed was his salvation. They were so consumed by their own panic that they didn't notice the double doors swing open. I walked in, no longer the bride in white, but a woman dressed in a sharp charcoal gray power suit flanked by Silas Vance and Marcus Thorne. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor looked up, her eyes bloodshot, and sneered. "How dare you show your face here after the scandal you caused yesterday? Security will have you thrown out in seconds." She reached for the intercom, but Marcus stepped forward, placing a thick folder of legal injunctions on her desk. He calmly informed her that the security team now reported to a new board of directors. Silas then stepped to the head of the table, his presence commanding the room as he opened his laptop to display the updated shareholder registry. As of 8 o'clock this morning, the Vance Capital Fund has successfully converted the majority of your distressed debt into equity. Silas announced, his voice echoing with a cold, professional finality. We now hold 51% of Sterling Holdings. You are no longer in control, Eleanor. The color drained from Eleanor's face as she realized that while she was busy planning a theatrical humiliation in Aspen, we had been systematically dismantling her empire from the inside. Reid looked at the check in his hand, then back at me, his voice trembling as he asked what this meant for his inheritance. I looked at him with a pity that was far more painful than anger. I told him the truth. His mother's bank accounts were frozen. The corporate assets were being liquidated to cover the $200 million in debt, and that check was now nothing more than a worthless scrap of paper. The look of pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes was the only apology I ever needed. Within the hour, Marcus handed them the formal eviction notices for the Aspen Resort and their Denver estates. They were being stripped of the very status they had used as a weapon against me. As they were escorted out by the very guards who used to bow to them, I stood by the window looking out over the city. I didn't feel a sense of petty revenge. I felt the weight of a hard-earned lesson. I realized that financial independence is the only true fortress a woman can build for herself, and self-respect is a currency that no Sterling could ever afford. I had learned that you should never try to use money to trample over others, because you never truly know what kind of weapons they are carrying beneath their silence. Eleanor thought my background made me weak, but it was exactly what gave me the analytical mind to see through her lies. Reid stopped at the door, looking back one last time as if waiting for a sign of forgiveness, a hint that I would use my new power to save him. I didn't say a word. I didn't even turn around. I simply watched the sun set over the horizon, my mind already moving toward a future where the name Sterling was nothing more than a ghost of the past. I walked out of that boardroom and into my new life, never once looking back at the wreckage I left behind.